Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to start in a couple of minutes. Please feel free to introduce yourself and your organization in the chat so we can see where everyone is calling in from. Again, we'll get started in just a couple of minutes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Please feel free to introduce yourself, your organization, and your country in the chat. We'll get started here in just 1 or 2 minutes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, your country and your organization, and we'll get started in just 1 minute. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar on standard provisions. Please continue to let us know where you're from in the chat. Introduce yourself. It's excellent to see where everyone is calling in from. Throughout today's webinar, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box at any time. We'll have several times to stop and answer any of those questions that you may have. So please feel free to ask your questions there. And please feel free to stay engaged in the chat with any questions from the presenter, as well as discussions with each other. You'll also be asked today to raise and lower your hands at different points, and please feel free to engage in that as well. A recording and the presentation slides for today's webinar will be available at the IntraHealth website, intrahealth.org/ASAP resources, and there are several other webinars there as well for your resources. A little background on ASAP. We are currently in ASAP 2. The purpose of ASAP 2 is to prepare local partners to have the capabilities and resources to serve as USAID prime partners. We have 2 strategic objectives at ASAP. The first is to strengthen local partners as they transition to receive PEPFAR funding and to comply with regulations. And the second strategic objective is to prepare local partners to directly manage, implement, and monitor PEPFAR programs while maintaining consistent PEPFAR program achievement and quality. ASAP has supported 18 total countries, all listed here, and I see many of you are calling in from the countries that we support, so thank you for joining us today. There are also some additional countries that ASAP 2 supported during ASAP 1, again listed here. Here's some key results. ASAP has supported 126 local organizations in 18 different countries. 113 of those have been local partner organizations, and 13 were local government partners. ASAP and USAID have broadcast over 105 webinars for more than 22,000 attendees total in 76 different countries. So thank you for joining us today and being a part of those numbers. Many of our webinars are available at the ASAP Resources website, the intrahealth.org/ASAP resources, and are available in 3 different languages often: French, English, and Portuguese. So if you or a colleague prefer French language or Portuguese language webinars, those are available for you at the ASAP Resources website. And I'll send that link in the chat shortly. We have several upcoming webinars. Next week, we have a webinar on leadership and governance best practices, as well as organizational capacity and compliance assessment, the NUPIS Plus 2.0, and the ASAP team will be presenting about our training manual on the NUPIS Plus 2.0. So if you have any interest in any of those or any of our other upcoming webinars, including writing an abstract, sustainability, resource mobilization and social marketing, procurement, USAID financial policies, controls and compliance, or data, please feel free to join us and register for any of those upcoming webinars. We are thrilled to have Doug Franke back with us for another webinar today. Doug Franke is the managing partner at Sustainability Solutions. Previously, he's been a partner at PwC before founding SSPC. He has 42 years of on-the-ground experience with USAID and USG rules, offering a plethora of knowledge that he shares with us regularly. So thank you, Doug, for that. He is a Yellow Book audit expert. He has clients, NGOs, and LIPs worldwide, and has the only peer-reviewed audit firm in Africa. So we're thrilled to have Doug back with us today. And Doug, I'll pass it back over to you.
Great. Thanks very much, Melissa. And thank you, of course, always to USAID for hosting us. Let me just get some sharing going up here and take over the screen there. Let's go. Is that coming up? Let's go back. There we go. Okay, we up and running.
Excellent. Thanks, Doug.
Thanks. Thank you, Melissa. Thanks again to you, to USAID for making this all possible. I'm delighted to be able to share knowledge after a few years of learning rules and regulations. And yeah, we of course ASAP has limited time. You know, you wouldn't want to sit here for 8 hours or 16 hours. You know, those courses are done normally in-house now at your offices around the world, you know, or live webinars. But ASAP, you know, you're getting the highlights, if you will, of all these topics. So we're quite excited. Yeah, and Catherine, who's the ASAP coordinator, and Melissa and her team have done a great job coordinating, and we wish them the best until the end of this project. Okay, Melissa explained what ASAP is about. It is critical now as we see localization continues. There's a push, and I think this one is more genuine. About 7 or 8 years ago, we had USAID Forward, it was called. Similar project, but I don't think it had the buy-in, if you will, from the entire U.S. government community. I think this one does for multiple reasons. So it's going to continue taking place. As Melissa said, I've been doing this for a while, 42 years, started in 81 in USAID Cairo, and pretty much decided this was a fun thing to do and important. I think you can, you know, we're achieving a lot through all the PEPFAR programs and agricultural programs and economic development, democracy and governance. I was speaking with a partner today in Bosnia, where they are, you know, doing great God's work, you know, making sure corruption is dealt with and so forth. So, you know, thank you all for the programs you're carrying out. Okay, so do me a favor. Let's have our first hands up. I would like to know how many of you were on the course last week or have been on these courses before. So just put your hand up if you have been on this course before, and then we'll just get an idea there. Okay, seeing that. Okay. Okay, excellent. Okay, so some of you have been on it before, so you've probably seen this, what we call the USAID puzzle. And the concept here is that when I'm sure we've all done a puzzle, and your understanding, I think what I must do, I must assume some of you are fairly new to the USAID environment or the US government environment. And so we have to, when we're doing any kind of training, one must assume basic knowledge or no knowledge. And that's what this puzzle represents. It represents that this is your understanding of how to deal with USAID as a implementing partner, possibly even USAID as a employer, an employer. And again, I'm sure we have some auditors on this course. Welcome to all of you. And we're training up in USAID Zimbabwe next week. And so I'm sure some of you will be there as well for the full course. But the bottom line is it's a jump. Okay, it doesn't make any sense when you pull the puzzle out. And so then when you start putting the pieces together, as we all know, let me get my little highlighter here called an annotator going. I think this one could help a little bit. The red dot there. Okay, so the whole point here is the squares, or if you will, or the corners are the easiest pieces. Okay, and from what you need to be compliant, that represents your award. Okay, and if I was doing this, if I was doing this in person, certainly I'd be showing you these sort of documents, but here represents your proposal. Okay, this sheet represents your technical and your cost proposal, and this is what you propose. Okay, based on that, you are going to win an award. It's called a notice of award or a cooperative agreement. CDC calls them a NOA, notice of award, and USAID calls it a COAG or cooperative agreement. And that is effectively, NOA is a notice of award of a cooperative agreement. Okay, this is what those four corners represent, your award. And Bob Strauss, who's the global guru of 40-something years, basically coined the term, I think, the four corners concept. And that rule is that for any rule to apply to you implementing partners, it has to be within the four corners of your award. Okay. Remember, awards used to come with paper and ink, and for a rule to apply, it has to be within those four corners, meaning either attached or referred to in. And USAID is pretty good about including what you need in your document, and that's what we refer to as the reference documents. Okay, this would be the third component of your situation. This gets attached, and that's what we're talking about today. We are talking about the standard provisions that come attached to your award. Okay, so that four corners is the rule. Now, let me just ask you this. Does anyone put in the chat here? Does anyone remember? So rule number 2, some of you have been to our physical training. Okay, so rule number 2 is read your award. Can anyone remember what rule number 1 is? Please put that in chat. What was rule number 1? Anyone? We've got, FHI, we've trained you all over the world, Tanzania. We've got people, let's see, anyone take a stab at it, rule number 1? Okay, certainly Dennis, up in Tanzania, we've trained Afayangu. There's 3 rules. Okay. Then, okay, well, I'll just tell you since we're not, I'll give it another second because sometimes the distance, the technological, so it's 3 rules. Rule number 2 is read your award. Rule number 3 is actually related to the cost principles. As we're going to see, the cost principles change regularly. And so, 3 is read and revise and revisit the cost principles. All right, well, no one seems to be getting it, so I will leave that at that. So basically, let's just go here, get this up and running again. Let's go. All right, so funny enough, rule number 1 is never upset your agreement officer. Okay. And it's sort of, I said this because historically we were teaching a lot of courses about relationships with USAID and things that had gone wrong in audits. And a lot of times what happens is, your agreement officer is your lifeline to the US government. And she or he is a very important person, and you never want to upset them, and you don't have to. They're people, they've got families and lives and need to deal with it. So realistically, in the full course, we talk about your relationship with the US government, and you want it to be positive. Okay, you want it to be positive with the AO and your AOR, your representative, and the OFM, the finance team. Okay, and so the whole point is, they're people as well. So, try not to upset them. That comment, you never bite the hand that feeds you, and that's essentially true here. Okay. So rule number 2, though, is what we're talking about today. Read your award, because everything you need to comply with today's discussion is in your award. Okay, then we start pulling the other pieces together, the cost principles, which we talked about last week. And of course, then we've got our procurement and property standards and things that come together. That all comes together. And then finally, we end up with the A. Okay, now, of course, that would mean United States Agency for International Development. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about that A stands for your audit. Okay, your Yellow Book audit, or your U.S. Generally Accepted Government Auditing Standards audit, conducted in accordance with the Yellow Book. Still comes in a book if you want, Yellow Book. And that basically is the standards that we auditors, or your auditors, will employ. Okay, so the bottom line is you receive X million dollars, you spend it, and then you get audited. And then, God willing, you pass your audit with 0 or not too many findings and issues, and then you repeat, almost like the old washing instructions: wash, rinse, repeat. Same thing here. The U.S. government's looking for delivery. More and more important these days, delivery. And if you do that and pass your audit, I think you will be hopefully a long-term U.S. government partner. Okay, so we are going to talk about standard provisions for non-U.S. NGOs. They come in 2 different sections: Part 1, which are the mandatory, and Part 2 are the required as applicable provisions. Okay, so these first ones apply to everybody. I think there's 32 right now. We're not going to cover all of them. We're going to cover the most important ones that could get you in trouble. And then required as applicable has also about 30. And those, it depends on what you do. If you don't ship stuff on the ocean, you're not going to have the clause or the provision or ocean shipping. If you don't have subrecipients, you're not going to have number 8. If you don't have a NICRA, you're not going to have number 3. Okay, so your award gets tailored for whatever your project specifically is doing. Okay, it was last updated October 24th, 2023, and I'll be talking much more about this document as we go. Okay, now in your award, okay, your cooperative agreement, it has these sort of 5 sections. And these are pretty standard for USAID. And attachment A is called the schedule. And I'm going to go to the next page and show you that's what the schedule looks like. And we'll talk more about that in a second. Attachment B is the program description. And effectively what that is basically the technical part of your proposal. Okay, so USAID says, we want you to have X thousand people on care and treatment, or we want you to do ag research, or we want you to do whatever, your targets. We want you to voter register X thousand people. Okay, so in there, you've got how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, who our team is, and all that. And that's a description of how you are going to serve USAID with your program. And so generally, they take that as part of the deal. I mean, originally, they said, we want proposals to do X, say 10,000 people on care and treatment, and you explain how you're going to do it, how you describe how you're going to serve them, and then they say, great, that's what our agreement is. Here's your offer. Now, of course, this is not a contract, formal contract, but it is effectively a contract, meaning they've asked you to do something, you've made an offer, and then they've accepted it. So, in legal terms, that would be a contract. Okay, so that is, now someone's got to read that as well. Now, most finance type, the compliance people wouldn't generally read that, but someone needs to. Okay, now when I say someone needs to, of course, USAID read it when they gave you the award. But I'm talking about on your side, you got to make sure what you proposed is actually what they put into the award. Okay, it's not unknown that you offered to do something, and there could be a little bit of deviation. Maybe the program changed in the minds of the USAID people, or whatever else, behind the scenes. It doesn't always, it could be months and months and months between the time the original RFP came out and you actually get your award. Okay, so just make sure it does tie to what you offered. Okay, and then attachment C is what today is about, the non-U.S. mandatory standard provisions, and the RAAF, required as applicable provisions. Okay, so there is, now what we have here, there's a couple, we're going to learn there's different rule sets for U.S. organizations. I saw a lot of FHI folks from around the world sign in. Congratulations, welcome. you're going to have, because you're a US-based organization, you're going to have the US standard provisions. Whereas the folks up in Zambia and Kenya and Myanmar and these other places, you're a non-U, even though, well, I'm assuming you're a local organization, our folks in the DRC, and therefore you're going to have the non-US standard provisions. Today is about the non-US provisions. Marketing and branding, we'll talk a little bit about that, how you use your USAID logo, and environmental, let's not worry about that. It's just one of the sections. If you were doing something building or agriculture with pesticides and stuff, that would probably apply. Most of us in the HIV or PEPFAR space generally don't have environmental issues. Okay, so as I said, let's just jump back there. We are now talking about the schedule. Okay, now this is the most important part of your award, because this is where the agreement officer and her and or his team would have read your proposal and designed and crafted your contract or award to meet the purposes of the U.S. government. Okay, so everyone's unique. Now the structure may be similar. This came from a pretty large client of ours that well, I never talk about clients or countries or whatever, but a very large PEPFAR partner, and it had all of these provisions. Now yours is going to have something similar to this. Okay, so the purpose of the agreement and how long, normally 5 years, and how much, that's the plan for probably over 5 years. So let's just pick an example project. Let's say we are a project that's doing PEPFAR in, you pick it. I'm here resident in South Africa, although I'm an American, been here 32 years, and came here to open up the Pricewaterhouse U.S. government audit practice. Mandela got out of jail. We needed, or South Africa needed a big four firm that understood U.S. government rules. So, but the whole point is, let's say an example is we have a project based in Johannesburg, and it is a 5-year, $10 million project. So about $2 million each year. So it's not a big project, but it's adequate. So this award would say amount is anticipated 10 million, and sort of the payment terms, you'd have probably your original obligation. And we'll talk about this, your original tranche of available funds. Okay, what's the budget? Again, it could be an annual budget, or it could be a life of project budget. And some of them are broken out, years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They don't have to be. And remember, you're not, regardless of what they say, you're not guaranteed to get that money. Okay, and the U.S. government's funded annually, and even right now, we're under what's called a CR, or continuing resolution, that still has to be approved by Congress. And of course, you see the dogfights happening there right now over the Ukraine, over the border, over many things. Okay, so hopefully the money's coming soon. Okay, then monitoring and evaluation, huge, huge, huge section. That's more probably for the technical guys, but not all. Reporting could be your financial reports. How often do we need to submit them? How often do you need to submit your SF standard form 425, quarterly, semi-annually, or annually? Okay, so all that stuff is going to be, this is quite a large section. Okay, and of course the M&E section of what you're doing, that's huge. Title, use of property, we'll talk about that. Indirect cost rates, this is not really the indirect section, or these, there's a whole, well, it could be a 2-day, a 1-day, or a 4-hour, or an hour and a half presentation on indirect costs. I will probably briefly touch on it, and what's going to happen now when the new rules are changing. Program income, that's when you generate revenue off your program. So a chicken program, a feeding program, a vegetable, weaving, basket weaving, some sort of thing, selling condoms. What do we do when we generate income? And how do we treat that income? And so forth. Okay, we'll talk about cost sharing at the end of the award. Geographic code, where you can and cannot buy stuff from. Substantial involvement, who is involved? Normally it's the AO, Agreement Officer's Representative on the USAID side. It is the PO, Program Officer or Program Official on the CDC side, and so forth. Okay, and now notice down here, A16, Standard and Mandatory Provisions. That is what we're talking about today. So they're saying all this, and then at the here they say, look, this is attached at Section C. Okay. So where do these rules come from? Now, you should know that by now we are well after the original COFAR, or Uniform Guidance. Where did all the rules come from? Well, it's called the UG, or Uniform Guidance. Okay, and that came out. This gentleman, Gilbert Tran, works for the OMB, and he was part of the original team. It's with what's her name? Gloria escapes me now. They are the key people in the COFAR team that use 8 different agencies, some of the large NGOs, to craft the uniform guidance. Now, what that's about, it is that basically President Obama said, look, when he got into office, the rules were a little bit of a mess in terms of there was a lot of different rules for different agencies and state and local government and the federal government and the not-for-profits and the American indigenous Indians and Eskimos and so forth. So he said, look, we want uniform guidance. And so that's what this COFAR, Council on Financial Assistance Reform, put together. Okay. Now, every agency of the federal government, when the US government publishes a rule, every agency is given up to a year to determine, is this proposed or draft rule going to work for us? Or are we going to need some changes? Okay, so you can see here the agencies, and I'm not going to read them all, but I'm just going to highlight here. USAID had some changes. Okay, Department of State, some of you might get Department of State money, they had some changes. Then Health and Human Services, CDC, NIH, and so forth, they had some changes. Okay, so although it's called uniform guidance, and I'm going to show you the changes coming up in the next couple of months, significant changes coming up. About every 5 years they revise it, and this current revision is massive. I'll take you through about 21 of the changes coming up. So you need to be ready for those. Okay, but the bottom line is, what did USAID change? Well, what's unique about USAID versus all the rest of these agencies? First of all, well, we're overseas. So whereas in the States, they use miles and they use pounds and they use gallons, the rest of the world uses kilometers and meters and kilos and, those sort of things. So liters. And so, one of the changes they said is, look, we're going metric. We're the rest of the world is metric. And so for USAID purposes, but that's not the only thing. That's just an example of one of the small changes. The big change is what I call the local rules. And what USAID did quite smartly, and that's the CFO office, that's the controller office. The financial offices, the chief financial officer, a gentleman named Reggie, I think Reggie Marshall. He and his team are going to have to revise the USAID rules once these new rules drop or finish, which should be in a month or 2. Okay, what I'm showing you here, a very busy slide. Don't worry about it. And I never expect you to remember any numbers specifically, except 1 or 2, and I'll talk about those. But the bottom line here, all these old boxes with the red dots are no longer. These are the ones that was, A110 was for NGOs, let's say, and A102 is state and local governments. And then the various cost principles, A20, 122, we talked about that last week. That's the cost principles for not-for-profits. A21, educational institutions. A87, state and local governments, and so forth. Okay, Obama said no, one rule set. Okay, so what was created is the uniform guidance is known as the 2 CFR, 2 Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200. Now, Health and Human Services, that's the largest U.S. government agency. And I did some research. I did training in-house for CDC the last week, and I was doing research. I think they spend over $1.7 trillion in the mandatory spending, and then hundreds of billions of dollars in the discretionary. So it's about probably $2 trillion of U.S. government money. By large, the largest U.S. government agency. And their rule set was in a certain place in the 45 Code of Federal Regulations. So they said, look, we'll pretty much do the same rules, but we're going to place it and put it into an area where our millions of partners around America basically know where to find it. Okay, so whereas we would go to look into CFR 200 for USAID and everyone else, Health and Human Services or CDC is sitting at 45 CFR 75. Okay, I'll show you how to get there. But the whole point about this slide is what USAID did, and they were allowed to do, is the USAID guys said, look, there's a lot of rules that really don't apply overseas, or it's too complicated for our local partners. And this is so true now that we're getting into localization. So what they did is they scoured the entire uniform guidance. And they basically what they did is they created what I call the light version. You've got Coke and Coke Light, Bud and Bud Light. You've got Tusker and Tusker Light. Okay, so the whole point is this non-US standard provisions, which is the attachment that we're talking about, is a light version. Okay, it's lighter or less than the US version, the one FHI would have to comply to or care, Save the Children, IntraHealth. You're all based in the States, even though you're operating in Manila or the Congo or somewhere like that. Our friends in Nigeria, FHI. There, you still because your headquarters are based in the US, you have the US standard provisions. So what we're talking about today is the non-US or the light version. Okay. And so we'll have to think, and then what I'm saying is as these new rules change, we're going to have to be aware of these changes. Okay, so let's just spend a few minutes talking about these changes that are likely to take place. Okay, first is, now again, this is, I'd like to say, I mean, if we were training you online, we've got a full-blown course coming up March 7th. So if anyone's interested, you'll see my email at the end here, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, whatever, 7, 8 through the 13th. That'll be virtual. As I said, Zimbabwe next week is in person. We're working with Manila on an in-person, working with USAID Congo on an in-person, working with USAID Nigeria on an in-person. So certainly, keep in touch with us, and we'll let you know if that's happening. And or to talk to your mission, saying, "Dear guys, are you going to be contracting for local training?" Okay, but the whole point is we have what we call a digital pack, and I'll try to make it available to ASAP. Okay, where you can find what we call the red line version, and it's I think 501 pages of the uniform guidance that is not redacted, but highlighted in red all these changes that you're going to be subject to when it comes out. Okay, so the open period for discussion was, well, they created it all last year, 2023. And I think October 4th, they said, guys, it's open for comment. Okay, and then December 5th, comments close. And we certainly submitted some comments because we thought some stuff in there needs to be clarified, mainly from our foreign point of view. Okay, just to make it easier for us. And so the bottom line is then that was in December, we're in January, we're in February, I would think March, April, likely to be coming out. Okay, so let's just talk about the highlights. Well, currently the single audit threshold or your yellow book threshold is 750. That's going to bump to 1 million. That means fewer audits will be taking place. Okay, equipment and supplies. Now these numbers at the bottom here are the references for where you would find these draft proposed changes. Okay, but the equipment threshold is going to go from 5,000 to 10,000. Now that's huge. Okay, now remember, this is uniform guidance is for the 99.5% of the funds that are spent within the states on U.S. state and local government, NGOs, American Indians, Indigenous people, Eskimos, and others. Okay, so that's the whole point in universities. Okay, so they weren't thinking about us. They weren't even dreaming or even worried about us in their worst nightmare. They weren't thinking foreign, but we are foreign. Okay, so that will have an effect. So especially this 5 to 10, what that would allow you then, and we will get into this in a little bit later, but I don't think any of us set our capitalization threshold for our own equipment at 10,000. I mean, that would only be vehicles and something major like that, right? We take care of our computers, many times our desks, our chairs, our vehicles, all those things we take care of. So if you set your capitalization threshold and your asset threshold at less, and many NGOs use $500 or $1,000, then this is what, when I say it's not going to apply to you, it won't affect you because you already probably had a capitalization policy less than 5,000. Okay, so that's not really going to change, but this audit thing will change. Okay, we're going to talk about, and again, last week when you were in the cost principles, 407 is the principle where it talks about the things that need prior approval. And there were 26 currently, I'll say historically, but there's currently 26 items that need prior approval, such as issuing a fixed amount sub-award, vehicles, entertainment, certain types of buying equipment, stuff like that. 10 of those 26 items have now been eliminated, meaning you no longer need prior approval. Okay, so so I'm going to go through all these, but to me, all these changes scream one word, and that word is risk. Okay, they made these changes to make it easier for administration in the states because, for whatever, spending the trillions of dollars in the states, well, they've just tried to make it easier. Fewer audits, fewer things needing prior approval. I mean, the U.S. government has a shortage of people across many agencies willing to do this stuff, willing to be government workers. We know there's a shortage of agreement officers around the world. Okay, so that's just one manifestation of the shortage. So the uniform guidance guys, the OMB said, we'll make it easy. Now overseas, it's more risk. Okay, you have more rope to hang yourself. And so that's why I think that we'll talk to what the missions need to do. We probably don't have time here, but we talk about what the missions need to do to be ready for this risk, maybe in their pre-award surveys or other things, and especially primes with subs. Primes, this whole all these changes just scream risk, risk, risk. Okay, so let's just let's watch these with open eyes. Again, I'd be happy. Matter of fact, do me a favor. If you want this document, at the end of this thing, I'll my email address up there. Just send me an email and I'll send you the attachment. Okay, or I'll put it up with Melissa. Melissa, how easy is it if I send this to you? Do you put it up on the ASAP site?
It's no
You
problem. I
probably
can include it as a listing.
cool. Okay, great. Okay, the next one, now continue to provide agencies like USAID with discretion to apply subparts A through E to foreign organizations. Okay, so that's what I said. That is basically exactly what this was, where that rule already existed. A through E. Okay, so F is the audit section. They don't have the ability to change F, but they do A through E, and that's how USAID created this light version, and they'll do it again. Okay, MTDC is changing, modified total direct costs. And it used to, but it's currently $25,000. So if you're a prime with a sub, you're currently only enabled to recover 10% on top of the first $25,000 of your subs. Now that's jumping to 50,000. And one of the last things we're going to talk about today, or at least in this section, is that the 10% de minimis looks like it's going to go to 15. So whereas currently you're getting 10% on 25 or $2,500, it's going to be 15% on top of 50, which is $7,500. So you're going to recover a lot more of your overheads, if you will, under the new guidelines. And again, risk for the government, for the missions, that's risk. Okay, little clarity here they want on when there is fraud and when primes and subs must report credible evidence. Okay, now one of the standard provisions, I think we've got it in this short version, I think it's 26, where is everyone, prime, if there's fraud at your prime level, you must report it to your AO and to the Inspector General in Washington. Not our local IG up here, Rob Mason, great guy, about 20 clicks up the street, retiring, unfortunately, in the near future, but the new guys are coming. And yeah, we've got a fantastic rig. And you'd say, well, hang on, why don't I just report it here? I'm in Africa, or there's one in, of course, Manila, and there's one in Frankfurt, and so forth. But the bottom line is it's Washington that gets to learn about the fraud first. Okay, the question is, what is credible evidence? Okay, that's a gray area, and I think we're going to need credibility. We're going to need some clarity here on what is credible evidence, because the last thing you guys want to do is not report a fraud. Okay, I mean, FHI 360, you know how you got your new name there, right? It used to be Family Health International. Well, not anymore. You've obviously absorbed a large organization. And the whole point is, that, you were deemed, of course, the good guys, and of course, assumed those projects of an organization that maybe didn't do the right thing. Okay, so my whole point, we see fraud all the time. We help implementing partners, missions, look at fraud. The whole point is, guys, it happens. There's always fraud happening. Don't hide it, report it. Okay, best thing you can do. So when it's credible, so someone comes to, maybe you're the finance officer, and someone says, I think so and so is stealing, or I think we're missing inventory, or something happened. We got hacked, and we're missing our bank got raided. Okay, well, okay, that's not yet credible evidence. Then maybe you spend a day or two checking out how did it happen? Okay, what do you think was stolen? What do you think the guy embezzled? Then you think, okay, we've got something here. That's the time you report it. Okay, don't wait. Okay, don't, people used to think, oh my God. I mean, I was chairman for a couple of years of a large NGO in South Africa, a USAID partner, and we were always worried, there's fraud happening, and we think, oh, are they going to close us down? No, it happens all the time. They're not going to close you down for reporting it. They will close you down for not reporting it. Okay, so just report it. And what are they going to want to know? One, what happened? Two, what did you do with the guy who perpetrated the fraud? Three, was it our money? And you also, when there's fraud with even other people's money, you have to report that as well. Okay, to your AO. Okay, I talked about the prime at the subrecipient level. What if there's fraud at the sub level? Subs, you must report that to your prime, whoever the AO equivalent at the prime is, who gave you the money, and the IG in Washington. Okay, you don't have a relationship with USAID subs, so you report it to your prime. They may report it to the USAID. You don't have a direct relationship in the field with USAID. Okay, here just talks about fixed amount awards and entitles recipients to keep unexpended funds. Okay, fixed amount awards are a very useful tool, fixed amount subawards, and we're going to see a little bit more about them. Well, here it's just right here. Okay, fixed amount subawards used to be limited to the simplified acquisition threshold of 250. Okay, we talked about fixed amount awards in the last seminar. If you want to see that, you can probably go back. As Melissa said, it's on the web. But there's no threshold now for the amount of a fixed amount subaward. Okay, there never was for a fixed amount award, but for a fixed amount subaward, which is like a baby cooperative agreement, there used to be the threshold. So again, doing this creates risk because it gives you more leeway, gives you more leash to hang yourself. But certainly for people who can manage subrecipients, you might want to consider fixed amount subawards. Okay. Okay, let's go here. Provide additional flexibilities when interest-bearing accounts. I think USAID's always been pretty good about that. We'll call it Islamic banking. So I don't think that's really new to us. Of course, if you're working in a country where interest is haram or prohibited, then we've already got that option. So there's not much else for us here. Okay, program income for closeout. I think we're having a session on closeout, or we've had one, and it's in certainly the longer course, but the closeout is fraught with unknowns, and that's a problem. I mean, nowhere in the award is there any guide, unfortunately. I mean, is there much guidance on closeout? And very rarely is there, well, I'd say very rarely, there's really not a lot in your guidance here. So auditors or recipients, one of the things you might want to do is make sure you know how your agreement officer, what they think about how closeouts are supposed to work. And in our closeout session, we say, look, 6 months before your project's coming to an end, you need a plan. You need a 6-month, like a backwards Gantt chart, working out what's going to happen 6 months out, 5 months out, 4 months, when do we terminate the subs and all that. So literally on the last day of the program, you're done. Okay. Now, of course, there's going to be a 120-day period after that, any program ending where you can recover costs, but it's a gray area. My whole point there is, if I were you, I would, as soon as I get 6 months out, I would be documenting for my agreement officer and AOR, dear guys, here's the money we're going to spend up until the end of the program, let's say December 31st for ease of, so in June, you're reaching out to say, dear AO, we're going to be spending this up until June, for during the program, and then January through April, these are our closeout costs. And we want you to pre-approve them now, and then even decide maybe what to do with the money. You might want to put that money aside. You might want to make sure it's obligated and made available to you. And more importantly, agreed upon, right? Your audit is going to be in the post period. Your termination of people and all the finance and all the admin that goes with closing a project gets done, of course, once the project's done. Okay, what do we got? 10, clarify recipients don't need prior approval of individual subs. Okay, so I think as we know, and we're going to see again today, in what is it, number 4, I think, mandatory 4. When you do your proposal, most of us are, some of you have a consortium, so we're saying, great, we're the prime, and these guys are the subs. And USAID looks at that, and they approve it, and they give you the award. Okay, then after that, if you're going to swap out a subrecipient that had been already approved by aid, I think the whole point is if you're going to swap that out for a new one, I think USAID still wants to know about that. It's possible if you're creating subawards that weren't originally envisioned. I think that's the way I read this. You may not need that to be approved. Okay, but I would always seek USAID's approval for your partners because they may know things about that sub that you don't know. Okay, as we said, certain prior approvals are disappearing. So real property and equipment, well, that's huge. Direct costs, that's huge. Entertainment, it still is that we still need a prior approval for, actually, they don't actually. No, it used to be, of course, entertainment can only be for programmatic purposes, but we don't need approval anymore. So what that means for all of you is like, guys, when you're doing your proposal, you need to be crystal clear now. What are we doing? And how much it's going to cost. Okay, and then I would add a column in actually throughout the whole thing. If you're doing a spreadsheet, I would add a column, especially in your budget, and specifically identify whether the costs you're including, one, are specifically allowable, as for the cost principles, and two, require prior approval. Because effectively what this says is it's somewhere, it's coming up in here, it's coming up in another one. It says that if you put it clearly in the budget and it wasn't rejected, then that cost will be allowable. Okay, so again, it makes it incumbent on you IPs, your budget team, and budget team's not just the finance guys, it's the technical people working with the finance team to put this thing together. And it's not like the technical guys work for a month and 3 days before you give it to the finance guys to cost out. You should have what we call activity-based costing. I've got an activity, I've got a cost. Okay. And one more thing, when you're building your budget, build it in pieces. So God forbid if USAID and CDC, as they have done in some countries, decide to split the country into north, south, east, west. CDC, you handle that geographic region, and we will handle this. Well, it's happened that people have been asked on a Thursday afternoon, oh, by the way, we're changing the way we operate in this country, and you're going to take over CDC projects in your region, and they're going to take over some of yours in their region. And so basically be able to build your program as if you had to split it apart, meaning in segments. I hope that doesn't happen, but it has happened. It could happen again. Okay, let's see here. This is quite important. So when the uniform guidance came out, note the first word, uniform guidance. And the intention was, and this was created by the Council on Financial Assistance Reform, or COFAR. They said, look, we're gonna migrate, or we're gonna transition to uniformity. Okay, that was December 26, 2013. Okay, we're 10 years after that. Every 5 years they do the revision. Now we're in our second major revision, and there's not unanimity. Okay, not just because USAID has their special, again, the USAID funding is foreign funding is so minimal compared to the total government, budget. It's less than half of 1%. Okay, it's still billions, but the federal government's trillions. So the whole point here is they want unanimity, and we're not getting it. So there are NGOs in Africa and probably elsewhere, that non-US NGOs, that have a NICRA, negotiated indirect cost rate, and CDC is not accepting it. And it specifically says in their rules they must accept it, but they're not. Okay, so instead of these NGOs, and who in South Africa, it's Broadreach, Mothers to Mothers, it is Right to Care. I think up in Kenya, we got AMREF. There's another NGO just down the street here who's going to get NICRA here. And so they do get CDC funding, and CDC is not currently accepting it. So it forces non-unanimity. It forces them to what's called bifurcate their accounts and account through USAID with their NICRA, or collecting your overheads, and CDC is direct costs. It's just a mess. So now, instead of complaining to that agency, you go above them. You go straight to the OMB and say, dear OMB, our funder is not playing by your rules, and let's assume then the heat's going to come down from on top. Okay. Specifically, this 414 is the cost principles relating to indirect costs, and that's the 10% de minimis clause. 414F actually. This 414C2 is where it says all agencies must accept other agencies' NICRAs. Okay, so that'll be helpful to some of you. Okay, again, right next door they say that clarify that pass-through entities have to accept someone else's NICRA. Okay, raising the de minimis rate from 10 to 15%. Huge, it'll be controversial. And those of you who thought I wanted a NICRA, a negotiated rate agreement, start to think, I don't know if I would. I mean, even if my real indirect cost was 15, 16, 17, that, remember, the NICRA gets audited. The 10% de minimis or the 15% does not get audited. So it's like, it's easy peasy. Okay. And you don't have to justify it. What 414F specifically says is no documentation is required to justify the 10. Now it would be 15% de minimis. So I think if I were all of you, I would understand this incredibly clearly and make sure you just recover all your costs and get the de minimis. Okay, we can talk about that as well. Okay. This is important. It requires subs to certify to the primes that the information is complete and correct. Okay, huge risk. If I'm the CFO or the whatever, I'm the finance manager for a sub, I'm going to certify now. What does that mean? Certification means you personally are putting your whatever parts on the line to say it's correct. Okay, this invokes the False Claims Act, which basically says you can be personally liable. So if you're going to sign that document, the first thing you want to do under the new guidelines is make sure your organization has D&O or directors and officers insurance, right? So you can't personally be sued unless you have done something wrong. But what this also screams is adequate internal controls. Okay, and if you guys don't currently have any kind of a risk assessment process, either, many organizations can't afford an internal audit division, which is fine, but you can outsource it. We train thousands of auditors a year, and we always ask them in the auditor training, the Yellow Book training, we say, guys, if you were asked by a client to provide outsourced internal audit services, could you? And about 90% can. Okay, and this is auditors from all over the world, from Thailand and Manila to over to Latin America, and of course throughout Europe and Africa. So you can't use your auditor who's doing your Yellow Book audit to do internal audit as well. But there's dozens. Let's just say there's many audit firms in your country who could do that. Okay, and it starts with just a risk register, and that to me would be, and it's an allowable cost. Okay, it's allowable cost to basically to have a risk register to manage your U.S. government funds. Okay, so just be careful there. Remember, a false timesheet is a false claim. And you're certifying, no, I've got 23 people on this project. Every month we submit the voucher. One of those is false, you're liable. Okay, so don't let that happen to you. Let's not worry about exchange rates. Remove prior approval for participant support costs, selling and marketing, and so forth. Again, 407 is where those are going to show up. So again, that just screams risk. What else? Closeout costs, termination. Okay, we can talk a little more about, well, we won't have time to talk about closeout, but I've already said closing out is a risky area. Know what your AO thinks, and your AOR and the OFM. Admin for closing out, well, that's a good thing. So go to 472 in this red line version and read this in more detail. I'm just giving you the upper highlights. Compliance testing, that has to do with the audit section down here in the 500. You don't need to worry about that. We auditors will certainly, we do a lot of compliance testing to justify your fund accountability statement, now known as a CFA. Okay, clarify under direct costs, joint costs are allowable. That's in the appendix number 4. That appendix 4 relates to non-US organizations. Okay. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Most of you should be allocating IT as an other direct cost. Okay, so those are the ones. So I'm going to go take some Q&A here in a second. So what I want to say here is we're talking about rules now. What applies to whom? Well, most of us are in the foreign situation, and we probably have a non-US prime. Okay, so FHI 360, even if you're working in Manila or the Congo or whatever else. And someone put into the chat who won last night, Congo or the other Ivory Coast, because I watched the South Africa game lose in a penalty shootout to Nigeria, but I saw that game came home much later. Okay, good luck if you won. But the whole point is an FHI is not a foreign prime, even if they're operating in a foreign country. We're talking about a local organization who is a prime. Now, what rules do they get? They get their award, right? You're going to get the award, and they're going to get the standard provisions as the attachment. That's what they get. That's your four corners, IPs. That's what you have to comply with. That's what someone must read and make sure you comply. Okay, so you're going to get your award, and that will include the non-US standard provisions. And then, of course, it brings in the 400 section, which is the cost principles. There are no foreign cost principles. It's just cost principles. The same ones apply to everyone. Okay, so then you've got, most of you will have a non-US sub. So I'm a Zambian prime, I got a Zambian sub. I'm a Kenyan prime, I'm a Kenyan sub. Okay, so basically the same rules apply at the prime and sub level. Okay, it's only when you'd have, for example, and say FHI used to be your prime, and they were very good for many years. And USAID says, oh, you know what? They were so helpful. Why don't you put them as a sub under you? Which is good. They can still support you from beneath instead of above. Okay, but the problem with that is FHI or any IntraHealth, Care, Save the Children, World Vision, any of them. I just use FHI because many of us know who they are. That's just a good example. The challenge there is FHI doesn't have the non-US provisions. It's got the US ones. So effectively, there's no light version for FHI. And so the problem here is that the foreign entity, or the foreign prime, has to manage a sub that has a larger rule set than you do. So that's a challenge. Okay. But just be careful. Not that you can't do it, but you just have to be able to step up to the game and manage it. Okay, this would be more where let's not even worry about this too much. I mean, you've got the slide, but USAID could give it to a US-based prime. Here it would be like an FHI. And again, they've got the whole uniform guidance applies to them. And they have a non-US sub, which would be you, okay, many of the non-US guys. And so FHI 360 would pass down to you the baby version or the light version of the rules. Okay. And so a US prime with a non-US office, again, FHI or IntraHealth, we overseas here, we still follow the US-based rules. Okay. So here's what it looks like. You would go to www.ecfr.gov, Electronic Code of Federal Regulations. Okay, and that's what you'd splash out here. And you go to title, basically you want the 200 section. You can get it here or you get it here. I go to chapter 2, basically, the 200 section. And then this is what pops up, title 2, chapter 2, let's just see here. Okay, and then you would basically get down to, it would click on here, and that's what you're at. You got A, B, C, D, E, F, and you got acronyms and definitions is where it starts. I'm not going to go through this. We don't have time, but that's what you'd want to bookmark. Okay, you don't bookmark the 2 CFR 200. You bookmark it when you get right down into the guidance, and then you bookmark it. Then you just call it the USAID version of federal guidance, or USAID UG. Okay. This is what we're going to talk about. Standard provisions for non-US NGOs. Last updated, you can see the date down here, October 10, 20. That's the American numbering, October 24th. So not so long ago. And it's called ADS. Now, ADS stands for Automated Directive System. And there are a series of these guidelines, which are effectively USAID's guidelines, their own policies and procedures for how to do stuff. Okay, so there's a lot of good information that even if you're implementing partner, it doesn't hurt for someone who wants to win more work from the US government or USAID to go here and learn their rules. Okay, so you'll just be better prepared or understand when they're asking you for stuff, why they're asking for it. Okay, you're aware. Okay, well, that's what ADS 303. So ADS 303, there's a couple different versions. ADS 303 full stop is USAID's guidelines for issuing you grants and cooperative agreements. Okay, ADS 303 MAB is the non-US provisions, and MAA is the US provisions. Okay, so again, I don't want you to remember these things, but you're saying, Doug, but 303, why are you saying 303 relates to USAID rules? They've got their own version. MAB is what we're talking about now. You can get these at usaid.gov. Up in the top right-hand corner, there's a little search facility. Just type in ADS space 303 MAB. The first thing to pop up will be this document. Now, the good thing about this document, let's say a couple things. One, someone needs to read this document in its entirety, in addition to the person who reads your award. Okay, you need someone who is OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, who loves details, loves spreadsheets, loves deadlines, loves managing. That's what you need. Someone who loves saying, great, we got a new award. I'm going to go through this in great detail and document all the things that we have to do. Not that she or he is going to do them all. She or he is going to be empowered to find someone within the organization who is going to do them all. Okay, we're going to see that there's over 350 things that you are supposed to be doing. Okay, so all I'm saying is you need to read this, but you only need to read this effectively once. And the reason for that is once you've read it, every time USAID makes a change, they highlight it in yellow. So down here, this recipient employee conduct, that's one of the things that was updated in this version. So once you've read it, I mean, all you have to do is, this one didn't change, since you can see some of these are quite old. Properties 2014 hasn't changed in 10 years. So once you've read it, you've read it. But now when the new guidelines come out, all you do is look for the yellow bits. Okay. And so these are the ones that changed. Safeguarding against abuse of kids is important, of course. This paperwork reduction, it's really not very relevant, but they put it in there anyway. So those are the mandatory. These apply to effectively all of us, whether you're a prime or a sub. Okay, and then we have the section that's called required as applicable. And as I said, if you aren't doing certain things, then these won't apply to you. So one of the challenges for the USAID team is creating, well, I say that, I mean, they have to craft an award, create an award that incorporates everything that the consortium is doing. Okay, the consortium might have, the prime might have a NICRA, okay, but the subs may not. The prime may have sub awards, but the subs won't. The prime or the sub might have OSID shipment of goods. He or she's importing grain or something. They are importing grain, but the prime isn't. So the whole point is, it's not plug and play here. The sub awards could be very different from. Okay, subs could be working with research. Subs could be working with have cost share. Subs could be working with sex workers. Okay, so this prime doesn't. So anyways, all I'm saying is people think, oh, I'll just copy the prime award and pass it down to the sub. It's more complicated than that. Okay, but we're going to talk about the important ones of these as well. Okay, so why don't we do, let's just see if we got a Q&A coming up. Let's just take a quick Q&A session right now. Okay, so Melissa, why don't you, I see we have a couple. Why don't you take us through the Q&A?
Sure. We have a question here on MSPs, and it says something about what are frequent MSPs that can be applied? So maybe elaborate more on that.
Okay. Well, your award agreement is going to have these things together. Let's just go back to here. If you're seeing, we're on M1 through M32, right? These are mandatory. Now, the question is, how important are they? Which ones can be applied usually? Well, these all apply. Okay, now as an auditor, and we don't have a lot of time to talk about this, but it's our job to assess whether you complied with the material, meaning the ones that could have a major financial impact if you didn't do them. Okay, there's 351 musts. I just want to briefly talk about the word must versus should. And it has to do with when the uniform guidance was created, that guy in the little box I said, Gilbert Tran, he brought over that rule from the yellow book. And he said, you know what, this works for the auditors, let's do it for the implementing partners as well. So that's why when you search your award, your person who's OCD, he or she should search the award for all musts and document those. And then you say, okay, if we're meant to do all these things, but if we didn't do it, how much of a risk would that be? And that's where your risk register would come in with, again, either you doing it yourself or outsourcing it to a local accounting firm. Okay, so do they all apply? The question is which are material? And we'll be talking about that as we go through. And as a matter of fact, we'd only have time for me to cover the most material ones. Okay, so that's what we're going to focus on. Good question. Thank you. Now, one more thing, guys, in the Q&A, they are anonymous. Okay, you don't hear Melissa saying this is from Joe in the Congo. It's not. They're all anonymous unless you want to say, I am in, X country and something unique about that country. But again, these are all anonymous. Great. Next question.
We have a question here about participant support costs and what requires prior approval and what doesn't for participant costs for conferences or trainings, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. So that read, first of all, one, participant support costs no longer need prior approval. And two, I agree. It's not very clear what those cover. So let's just say that it is going to be, and a lot of the times it referred to actually, training, and that actually has been pulled out. So all I'm going to say is generally a participant support cost for most people. And I did some training for USAID in-house, and we sort of agreed. Well, we're talking about non-employee costs. Okay, so maybe we're doing, care and treatment, and you've got people who work on a 1 day a week basis, or every time we're going to go out in the field and put up the tents and try to get the community to come together, community participation, those guys go out, and so we can give them a stipend, of course not a salary, a stipend, and we give them maybe some per diem and a travel allowance. That is conceptually what a participant support costs are. Okay, they're generally non-employee costs. Okay, but other than that, it's not a great definition, and it's even becoming less useful. So that's why I'm saying risk. So if you're not sure, right, that's what 407 allows you to do. And matter of fact, we're going to see standard provision number 1 here under allowable costs, where my bubble is floating here, right? It's going to say the second verse of this M1 says, guys, if you're not sure, ask, and get approval. That's why I also said, right? I also said when you're doing your proposal, right? When you're doing your proposal here, that's the time when I'm saying asking, that's the time to clarify. Your team should know, are these costs specifically allowed or disallowed? Of course, if they're disallowed, you don't put them in. But not only that, do these costs, which should be specifically allowable or not mentioned, what you're asking is your AO, dear AO or future AO, we're highlighting right now that these costs do require your approval or don't. Okay, but if they're not in the cost principles, and remember, there's only 56 specific cost principles that are mentioned as allowable or not, but there could be hundreds of types of costs that aren't mentioned there. That's at this right. That's where at that point you put in your proposal, dear AO or future AO, we're highlighting right now. We're highlighting that this cost is not specifically even mentioned, and so we are seeking your approval now. Okay, that's what I would be doing. And I've discussed this with many AOs, and they say, yeah, that will help us. Okay, next question, please.
The next question is about the de minimis and its function for smaller organizations. This asker, this participant, is asking about how they can help their larger organization or grantee work on getting a de minimis. Is it really helpful for a smaller organization to have one versus the kind of labor involved in all of the paperwork and documentation?
Yeah, okay. So again, we did the de minimis course a few times ago, and it's a very interesting topic. So a couple bottom lines here, okay? Basically, a USAID prime, especially a US based organization, which is what you're referring to, unnamed, but US primes, if your client asks for the de minimis, you cannot deny it. Okay, and if you're taking notes, this is 2 CFR 200, 332 A4 double I. Okay, so primes, you have options. Okay, so again, go there, 2 CFR 200, the uniform guidance, section 332, section D, A, which is what goes into an award. Number 4 talks about indirect costs, and that's where your options lie. So let's just, again, everyone knows who FHI is. Let's say FHI, you've got an awardee somewhere in the Congo or Kenya or even here in South Africa, a local organization. Okay, so when you're putting your proposal together, you've got to incorporate their budget in yours. They have the right to the 10% de minimis. Okay, and it's going to go up to 15. You can't deny it. Okay, so but there are other options. If that sub, and that's one of those ones I talked to you before, if your sub was right to care or mothers to mothers or Broadreach, they already have the NICRA. You have to give them that NICRA. That's the first thing. It's already been approved by the US government. Now, if you think it's too high, you don't have to include them as a partner. But if you're going to include them, they get the NICRA, right? You can't deny it. So it's either the NICRA or the 10% de minimis, or, and I've seen FHI actually do this in a country, which I think was very noble. You have the ability, any US prime or any US prime, let's say, that has a sub, and actually any prime, even if you're a prime that doesn't have a NICRA, you have the ability, primes, and I think this is a good thing to do. You can determine that subrecipient's actual indirect cost rate and give that to them. Now, it's not an official NICRA, but it is where you've gone in and you've studied the organization's true cost structure, and you can award them that rate. That rate is only approved necessarily in this award, but that's a great thing to do to get them started on the way to having a NICRA. And again, FHI did this. I can't remember the country. It may have been here. But I thought, well, good on you, because one, it taught your finance guys how to understand indirect costs, and you're helping that sub. Okay, so that is what is allowed. So just go look there, 332A4, and then read I, but double I is what we're talking about. Okay, excellent question. Next question.
The last question we have here is, other than, of course, this presentation that we'll share on our website tomorrow, where else can you find these standard provisions listed?
Okay. So all documents that we're talking about here are available on the USAID website. Specifically here, we're talking about these USAID standard provisions. So you would search on go to the USAID.gov, search ADS, uppercase, but I don't think it matters when you're searching, space 303-MAB. That's all you need. This is just telling you the data came out. Okay, that's where you go to find all these things. ADS 303 MAB. 303 MAA is the US version. Okay, so that is that. Let me just reshare there. I think we were in the heat of it, the thick of it. Okay, let's carry on. But all your questions are good questions, and I will try to stay on as long as possible to answer all these questions today. Okay, so let's continue. We've been through that. Okay, so let's briefly talk about the items that what we auditors, or you as spenders of the money, have to consider. And these are part of the cost principles. We are going to, as the auditor, we are going to determine that every charge you gave to the US government is deemed reasonable, allocable, allowable, and supported or documented. Okay, those are the sort of the big four concepts that you have to get right. And so very briefly, and we did this in much greater detail last week, but some of you may not have been on that sort of call. So bottom line is the first one, reasonableness. Now notice the 400 section up top here are the cost principles. Okay, so let's just move some things around here. And let's go here and here. Okay, so 404 is the 400 section are cost principles. 404 is reasonableness. And so it's called the prudent person rule. And in a nutshell, the US government says, you people spending our money, you are all careful with your own money. You are prudent, right? You're careful. So when you got your paycheck last week, you knew where the money was going. It's going to food, rent, petrol, insurance, your kids, school fees. You're careful. You're all careful with their own money. They're saying be as careful with the USAID money as you are with your own, and that will be reasonable. Okay. Now, this reasonableness is left up to the auditors, actually, to ultimately decide whether we think you were reasonable with the USAID money. Okay, so it's quite important that you actually hire good auditors who understand this. Okay, another concept of, well, I'll just leave it at that because we have limited time here. But so that was reasonable. What else do we have here? Yeah, allocability. I think I use another one here. Let's go here. Okay, yeah, allocability is hugely important. Okay, many people do not understand this, so you don't recover all your potential funding. Okay, study this one. I said if there's a number I want you to remember, it's this one: 2 CFR 200 405. And what the US government says, the US government is very fair. They will allow you to pick up their fair share of your costs, but you just have to know how to document in your proposal what we are asking for. Okay. And classically, and just be careful, everyone, missions and primes with subs. If you're a new government partner, you don't know what costs you're going to incur. You don't know that the Yellow Book audit is going to be more expensive than the statutory. You don't know that you're going to expect it to have a fully operating board and adequate internal controls and whistleblower program and all this stuff. You don't know, so you didn't put it in the budget. Okay, the best thing USAID can do and a prime can do when you're assisting a sub, and a prime you'd probably do this anyways to protect yourself, because we did have the subrecipient management this webinar already, where we talked for 2 hours about the risks of being a prime with a sub. Okay, but the bottom line is make sure all your costs are put in. Many guys say, "Oh, I don't want to fully cost it because when I win." Guys, realize 90% of the points for winning a cooperative agreement are, can you do the project? The technical part, not the costs. Okay, so that you'd be not wise to underfund your program. Okay. Okay, so what costs can you incur? Costs specifically for the award. Those are known as direct costs, meaning the but-for concept. Again, Bob Strauss, global guru, the but-for concept. But for or except for this project, I would not have incurred the cost. Okay, except for this project, I would not have incurred the cost. So you can see those. So if you're, a malaria program, bed nets, or a PEPFAR HIV program, test kits or condoms or whatever else. Okay, the only reason I'm buying them is for this specific project. Those are easy to audit, easy to ask for. The second type of allocable cost is a cost like rent that benefits both our USAID project and another project. Okay, and the concept, this second category here is that you'd use this for, a lot of us would be allocating our HR, our finance team, our IT, our insurance. Again, I talked about rent. So the concept here is so in our example, I said we're down here at $10 million project. I'm on the ground floor. Our USAID project's on the ground floor, and upstairs we've got the Global Fund project, also a health program. Okay, and so we're both in one building. We got 2 floors, ground floor, first floor. The rent check comes in, the rent invoice. How do we allocate it? Okay, well, rent is called a factor. We allocate rent based on square footage or space, square meters. So we're 100 square meters downstairs, we're 100 square meters upstairs. The rent gets split 50-50. Okay, easy peasy. What I'm saying here is the second concept. There is a basis for allocating it based on a reasonable, calculable mathematical formula. Okay, HR, how does that get split? Well, that's based on headcount. Finance, how does that get split? Well, it could be many things. Finance, hours, full-time equivalents, the amount of funding that flows through the projects, and so forth. IT, how does that get split? Well, normally probably based on headcount, and so forth. Okay, how does the board get split? Okay, so the second one is things that have a reasonable basis, but the third one is where too many of you don't understand it and you're not recovering. So if you must incur a cost to operate, then that cost will be partially picked up by the US government, even if there's no direct relationship between the activity and the project. So your board, your internal audit function, your internal controls session, your risk reviews, your statutory audit, although I think that one could come under the second thing here, your lawyer, your NGO, annual NGO fees. Okay, if you got to have them, then the US government will pick up its fair share. So generally, our advice to many organizations is, look, for those type of things, I would just be allocating it based on, it's got to be on a consistent basis. So do it on the size of the program. So downstairs, we said we're a $2 million a year program. Upstairs, if they are a $1 million program, then I would be doing it 2-to-1, the ratio there. Okay, I've never had a report, or clients have never had a report rejected that use that's a pretty reasonable basis for allocating it. Okay, so 2/3 of the board we pick up, they pick up 1/3. Okay, that's probably the most important thing. Now, I'm just going to give you this other number. Okay, so this is 405A 1, 2, and 3. Okay. You'd also want to go to 405D. So it's a little bit further down in the provision, but that's where it specifically states what I just said in layman's terms. And so if you're doing your proposal, right, many times, people say, oh, USAID doesn't cover that. No, no, no. You're not asking for it correctly. You put it here. Okay. Now up here, of course, you're not going to put, we need a board, but down here, you're going to put, and again, we don't, this isn't the subrecipient management course, but if you're doing the pre-award survey, right? And the USAID meant to do a pre-award survey on all awards before they issue it. And a prime, effectively, when you're doing you should do a pre-award survey either before or as soon as you get a sub-awardee. As soon as you've got the funds locked in, then you can spend it. But the whole point is, in this pre-award survey, there's 6 domains. The first 2 domains, the first one's organization. Is the client, is the subrecipient adequately have organized? Are they in business? Do they have a board? Does the board operate? Do they have conflict of interest policies? And do we have independence policies? All those things are musts. Okay, so the U.S. government can't say, oh, we don't pay for that. They do pay for it. You just have to know how to ask for it. Okay, so just justify all these things. That's what 405D helps you with. Okay, and then allowable. And so the whole point is to be allowable. First, it needs to be reasonable and allocable. That's why we've just covered those. And then there'll be some limitations in the cost principles. It talks about that. I said state and local government. Doesn't necessarily apply to you, but there are certain limitations in the cost principles. So that's why rule number 3, read and revisit the cost principles. Learn those. And then finally, they need to be consistent with policies and procedures that apply both to our example, upstairs and downstairs here, or our organization itself. So this consistency, when we talk about travel and allowances, okay, you can't say, oh, it's a USAID project, so we're going to charge their full per diem rates, but when it's a global fund or some other NGO that or the state funded us just for minimal activities, but they don't have any overhead money, so we're not going to charge them. No, everyone who benefits from your overhead structure has to pick up its fair share and consistent policies as well. So if your policy is, let's just talk in dollar terms, not kwacha, shillings, rands, whatever, but if your policy is when our guys go out on our NGO business, we let them stay in a hotel for up to $50 a night, and then they get $30 a day for food, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Okay, that's our policy because we're frugal, we're careful. It's our money. We can't spend a lot on our own people. But then when it's USAID money, oh, no, no, no. Now it's State Department, state.gov, they get $100 for food and they can stay in a nice 3-star hotel because that's what the per diem allows. Well, that's inconsistent. You can't do that. Okay. So if it's good enough for you to eat on $30 a day of food and stay in a $50 hotel, you'll do that for the USAID project as well. Okay, I'll leave it at that because I think we're going to have some questions. So now let's jump into the guidance here. Okay, so the whole point here, guys, is you're going to get an award. When the agreement officer gives you your first award, okay, it's going to come with the then current attachment provisions. Okay, now of course these things change. Probably I think it changed 3 times last year. When it changes, your agreement officer will amend your award. Now realize that you have to conceptually, as an auditor, I mean, the day you get your award, and then the provisions apply. But a lot of you are working your way towards becoming compliant. So the auditors will be a little bit forgiving, if you will, especially on the non-super compliant, the non-super critical things. Okay, but the bottom line is conceptually, in theory, the minute your agreement officer changes your award, he says, "Oh, well, these go out, and the new ones come in." That's the day that the new rules start applying from. Okay, so at this M21, there's something called an implementing partner notice portal. And you agree when you do your proposal, funny enough, that says if we win the award, that we will register for this portal where it notifies us of a change coming up. Okay, quite important. I think there's only been 9 in the last 7 or 8 years. We sign up for them, and all of you should sign up for certainly the nonprofit and the profit one, contractors portal, because that's just important information on how the rules are changing. Okay, so the most important point here is in your award, I talked about that Schedule A or Attachment A. I said those are the specific things that apply. Remember that the first section we went through all those? Okay, so the whole point of the Section A takes precedence over what is in your attachment. Okay, So what I'm saying is when the attachment changes, you need to go back and make sure that the Schedule A, that still applies unless it was modified by the AO. Okay, that's something to think about. So that's it. Read your agreement, rule number 2. Okay, so M1 is allowable costs. And what we're talking about here is this is probably one of the, notice it's M1. So it's starting out automatically. That's quite important. The November update was just actually fixing a typo. So this one's been around for a long time. Okay, so what it tells us is you, the recipient, will be reimbursed for costs incurred to carry out the purpose of the award. Okay, with the terms and conditions of the award and the cost principles. Okay, it doesn't say 2 CFR 200, the whole thing. It does talk about the cost principles, and here it's telling you. Okay, so what applies to you? Foreign IPs, read your award, read the attachment, follow the cost principles. That's it. As I said earlier, the second paragraph or the second part of M2 allowable costs then goes on to say it's your job, IPs, to make sure all the costs you're charging are reasonable, allocable, and allowable. And basically, what it says is if you're not sure, you have the ability to ask your AO. Okay. And in theory, you should be doing that before you expend the cost. But how you do that is you do it at the proposal stage. Don't wait until you win the award. Do it now. And when you do this, what is it showing the US government? What is it showing the evaluator? When you put in your proposal, this cost is not included in the cost principle. It shows them that you know the cost principle. It shows them that you care enough to highlight for them that this is a gray area. Because IPs, gray areas only hurt one organization. That's you. It never hurts the auditors. And of course, USAID can never be hurt by the gray area because they're the ones that decide black or white. Okay, so you don't want gray. You want black or white from the time you do your proposal. And that's why it's here. Okay, and it's also, you're going to see, well, you won't see it, but it's also at 407. We talked about it last week. That's where it talks about prior approvals and effectively says the same thing in 407. If you're not sure, ask. Okay, let's move some things around here. Okay, so allowable costs. What else do we have here? In terms of the award, okay, apply. That's what we said. You need to make sure costs are reasonable, allocable, allowable. That's fine. Okay, for not costs not clearly addressed, as we say, it's there. And okay, one other thing. So under cooperative agreements, you cannot earn a profit. Okay, well, even though you're an NGO, you say, well, we're not profit organization, but that doesn't necessarily prohibit you from earning a profit if you're doing things that could be profit making. Depends on the country how much you can make. But the bottom line is under a cooperative agreement, right? A US government cooperative, you can't earn a profit. If you're going to earn a profit, it's going to be under a contract. Okay, so just be careful there. And then there's the beautiful thing of these standard provisions is it tells you which of these have to be passed down to subrecipients. Okay, great. So let's start digging into some of the other ones. Accounting, auditing, and records. Okay, this is an extremely important one, and I don't have time to get into the details of all of these. I'm just highlighting that a couple points that I wanted to tell you about. Here it talks about the audit clause. And notice what it says here is the recipient must have an annual audit consistent with 2 CFR 200, subpart F. Okay. Now, a lot of people misconstrue that to say the subpart F is what we call the Single Audit Act. That's the old OMB A133. Okay, let's see if I've included the slide in this one. No, okay. But the bottom line is they're sort of the yellow book audit, which applies overseas, is less demanding and less required than the A133 or single audit. So the FHIs of the world, the IntraHealth, they have the US audit, which is basically what subpart F is about. Okay, overseas here, we have the yellow book audit. And all of your auditors are aware of this because we train your auditors and we've made it quite clear. The problem is when you got a US-based organization who passes down these rules, they think consistent with means in accordance with, and it's not. Right? Basically this whole subpart F incorporates the yellow book and additional stuff, which doesn't apply overseas. Okay, so just make sure you hire a good auditor and they will have a audit that is the yellow book audit. That's what you need. And of course, this will all be changing. So here's a perfect example, right? The CFO team in Washington created this light version based on the original uniform guidance. Now that the changes are coming, they're going to have to revise this light version and bump this 750 to 1 million and so forth, or make whatever changes they're going to make. Okay, so I call it the light version because agencies are not supposed to create deviant rules that are inconsistent, okay, with the uniform guidance. Okay, they can be lighter, but they can't be heavier. Okay. Again, we don't have time to cover all this stuff, but the bottom line is audits are due 30 days after you receive it from your auditor or 9 months after your fiscal year end. Okay, that's not going to change. And that was a rule change that I think was made in 2021 here. Okay. Any questions on audits? Weigh in. Okay. Amending your award or revising your budget. Here it is the whole point. Your agreement officer created your award, even though she or he may have had help. The bottom line is when there's going to be a significant amendment to your agreement, it's going to come from the AO in writing. Okay, change of scope or objective. So how much? So I said 10,000 people on care and treatment, scope 10,000, objectives, care and treatment. So if you want care treatment and PMTCT or some of the other things or orphan management, that's a change. It would have to be amended by the AO. Okay, anything to do with money has to be revised by the agreement officer, not the AOR. Okay, what did I say rule number 2 was? Read your award. There's a rule 2B. If you're funded by USAID, you also need to read what's called the AOR designation letter. Okay, and that's where the AO has designated and delegated certain authorities down to their AOR. Remember, the AOR is the guy who's working with you at the coalface. He or she has what's called substantial involvement. They're the eyes and ears of USAID. Okay, but they don't have a lot of authority when it comes to money and things like that. They can act as a conduit between you and the AO, but they don't have authority. Okay, so you got to read the letter to see what, if any, authority, and it won't be financial, but what, if any, authority the AO has passed down to their AO, who is your primary contact. Okay, so giving you more funding, giving you obligations, more and more money during the year. That frequently it happens 2, 3, 4 times a year. So your award changes. Okay, changing key personnel. Normally there's up to 5 key personnel. Frequently the AO has to approve that, and so forth. Okay, so I'm not going to go for that too detailed. Here, the second bullet point is quite important. So again, you are a prime with subs is going to propose a team. That team gets approved. And what it says is basically, if you're going to swap out one of your approved sub-recipients, you need agreement officer approval. Okay, now a lot of people say, oh, Doug, I only had 10 computers, but we want to buy an 11. And these are only $1,000 computers. Can I do it? Do I need approval? And what you need to realize is there's huge flexibility for moving money around between line items. And the concept, and they make it quite clear right here, it's also in 305. And if you're like the FHIs or the US-based organizations, but this is, again, the light version. But the rule is you have flexibility to move up to 10% of the total award, not the annual award or not the obligated amount, the total award between direct cost line items without prior approval. Okay, so in our theoretical example here, we've got a $10 million 5-year award. Anyone would have authority to move $1 million, 10% of 10 million, okay, between direct cost line items. So that's huge. Okay, so people say, oh, I need another M&E guy. Well, fine, you don't need prior approval. You've got up to $1 million in our case to move money between salaries and program or something like that. Okay, so just be aware. Now, I'm always suggestive. I would want to let my AOR know why we're doing it, and it doesn't hurt to get approval. You don't want to overburden your AO with this. They may say, look, learn the rules. I don't have to approve this. You have the flexibility. But I would say when you do your sort of entrance, your kickoff meeting when you win your award, I would raise some of these issues with your AO. So, dear AO, we love you. We're never going to upset you, but we want to know. Do you want to know when we're asking for certain changes or what? And then again, you want to say, we understand, we've read the designation letter. We know what you've designated to the AOR, but then give some examples of, would you want to be conferred? Would you want to be sought approval for these type of things? Okay, you want your AOR to know, your AO and AOR to know, we understand the rules, we're going to play by the rules, but what do you want, AO? All right, let's leave it at that. Procurement. Okay, so I always love talking now. So how are we doing, Melissa, on time? How much time do we have before we really get to the Q&A?
We have about 30 minutes until the end of the webinar. I can stay up until like 10:45, so we've got about 45 minutes left.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to move through some of these. So the bottom line is that you can read the award and read the procedures, but that's not necessarily going to make you an expert at it. And there are certain types of things that are required that you need to have a more knowledgeable person than just general knowledge. Procurement is one of those. Okay, procurement can be complicated. And there's some other things. Timekeeping is complicated. Procurement is complicated. Fixed asset management and equipment management sort of goes with procurement. That's complicated. Travel is complicated. And we're going to go through some of these travel things now. Okay, so the whole point about procurement is the reason I say this is there's a lot of musts in here. You must use your own policies and procedures, provided they conform to the, my words, significant requirements for what USAID demands. Okay, in procurement, there is no way a normal local NGO would have the same level of policies and procedures that the US government demands. Okay, and I don't have time to go through them. That's why I say you need someone to I do have time, but not in this course to go through. But you would have a guy, he or she has to read this 5, 6, 12, 14 that we're going to talk about just now, and then some other rules. Some of the old 22 CFR 226s and other rules that apply to procurement. Okay, you need a procurement guy. It's not just the finance guy. You need someone. I say guy, it could be a he or she, but it's got to be someone who's willing to sink their teeth into procurement. Okay, a lot of rules and a lot of record keeping is demanded here. And we auditors, I can promise you, we are going to audit procurement. Why? Because there's huge risks there. Huge risk that you didn't declare your conflicts of interest. Huge risks that you didn't have adequate source or number of quotes, depending on your policies, for determining competition and stuff like that. Okay, so procurement is complicated. Find a guy. Okay, next, eligibility for buying stuff. So that was M5. Now we're at M6. M6 says where you can and cannot buy stuff from. So there are things that are totally ineligible. So all these military spying equipment, it's not drones, it's spying equipment. Depending how you use the drone, you shouldn't use it for non-program purposes. Okay, but basically here we're talking about stuff that the U.S. government says, no, we're not going to do this. Weather modification equipment, cloud seeding and stuff like that, no. Air conditioners, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about things that are in agriculture projects. They say, oh, we can get an ionizer and we can make it rain over, this 5 square kilometers. Not allowed. Okay. Conspiracy theory. People are going to say the U.S. government's trying to change the world. Okay. Abortion stuff. No. Okay. Not that they don't fund like Marie Stopes that does abortions, but U.S. government's not going to pay for the equipment and the actual abortion itself. Okay, so that is ineligible supply, or sorry, that is stuff you can't buy. And then who you can't buy from, we'll see this down under 12 and 14. There are people who are on what we would call the bad list. And then the other one are restricted commodities. And these are things that you need prior approval for. So one more time, we are talking about the ability to, when you're doing your proposal here, say, dear AO, and it's even better. I know I need your prior approval, so we're asking for it right now. Okay, yes, I need vehicles. Great. We're going to need 6 cars, 4-wheel drive, because it's, rough roads and so forth. I need pesticides. It's a malaria program. Of course I need it. More importantly, I know we need it. So that's why I'm asking for it now. They're going to say, what clever people these people are. They're so smart, they're already asking us for prior approvals. That's what you want to do. Source and nationality, those rules changed a few years ago. So the whole point, as I said, 22 CFR, that's foreign operations. That's where the USAID and State Department rules used to be. So 22 CFR 220, it's 228, isn't it? Yeah, 228 is when you're buying stuff again, where you can buy it from and that's where you go for the other procurement rules. Okay, geographic codes, there's 935, 937, other ones. At ADS 310, they've got the lists of, now that's not the list of who you can and can't buy from. It's the list of the nature of the developing country. Okay, so it'll have China and Iran and Syria, places that are, what the status is. It's not saying you can buy from them. It just says what's the developed nature of that. Of course, we know you can't buy from Iran, but they're going to be on the 937 list. Okay, you have to know that that's going to be a prohibited source here. There'll be ineligible suppliers are anyone from some of these bad countries, if you will. Okay, we'll talk about title briefly. So let's just say, great, you are going to buy 5 vehicles, and you think, okay, well, USAID gave us the money, so they're ours. No, they're not yours. Okay, you may have title to it, but you don't own it. And the whole point is, U.S. government could vest the property in 3 different groups, essentially. You, the IP, secondly, the U.S. government itself, or thirdly, the people who are maybe like the Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Agriculture or Ministry of Health, who are going to get it. Okay, so title pretty much vests in the recipient unless the award is going to say something different. Then it just goes on to talk about property, and that's why I said equipment, tangible useful life greater than $5,000, that bumps to 10. But as I said, most of you are going to have notice. Recipient can set a lower limit for how you take care of your equipment, then you must follow that for the future for the U.S. government money. So that's what I'm saying. Bumping it from 5 to 10, yeah, FHI and IntraHealth will take advantage of that, but most of you won't. You're going to keep your thresholds at $1,000 or whatever else. Okay, using the property, just be careful, there's a priority. So, I was working up at AMREF, I think, up in Kenya. I worked there in 1986 and 87. And we were auditing, it could have been AMREF, but it doesn't matter. They had it could have been Catholic Relief, but, they had a parking lot full of, great vehicles. And they were like mint. They were beautiful because they took care of them. Okay, so you'd say, well, there's a whole parking lot. So if I'm the chief of party, I'll just pick one. Well, it doesn't work that way. Okay, there's a pecking order for using the property. So the project that paid for it has the first right. Okay, then it is the projects of the same agency. So let's say USAID project bought the vehicle. If the primary project isn't using it, then other USAID projects can use it. Then if that's not necessary there, then you can use other US government agencies. So CDC, state, agriculture, justice, those projects could use it. Okay, so there's an order there. That's why I'm saying property, you got to have someone who understands this. Okay, it is your job to maintain it. And again, why wouldn't you? It's an allowable cost. And more often than not, you're going to get to keep the property at the end of the award. So that's why I said I had a whole parking lot full of mint cars, because they took care of them. And the U.S. government paid for it pretty much. Okay, let's just make sure your fixed asset register is comprehensive. This is a frequent finding. Okay, you may have your own fixed asset register, but you don't necessarily incorporate all this information, so your register is deficient. Okay, which would be a finding. Okay, the auditors would say, guys, you're not following the rules. Please make sure you incorporate all this information. Okay, what else do we want to talk about? I've already talked about this. Let's just say that these rules changed, not just now, but fairly recently. So when it's time to dispose of the program comes to the end. Okay, historically, it used to be all equipment that had a purchase price greater than $5,000 needed to be listed. This is what we call your asset disposition plan. Okay, now it's only those items that are going to have a current end of project fair market value greater than $5,000. So again, what could that be? On most projects, that's going to be a vehicle or something, that again, something that was recently purchased in year 4 or 5. Okay, so that's what's going to be on this list. And then you have to share that with your auditors, and we put it into your final audit report. Okay, and then newer unused supplies with the current fair market, newer supplies with an aggregate, meaning about 30 toner cartridges, 4 computers, whatever else, and they together are $5,000 or more. Well, then that has to go into into your list as well. Okay, let's just keep going here. Marking and branding. As we know, USAID wants their logo in many different places. I mean, they want it, of course, on let me just say this, be careful where you use the USAID logo. Okay, there's rules on this, and there's always someone in every mission who can explain to you how to use the logo, where it's appropriate, and so forth. Okay, so let's just assume USAID likes their logo everywhere. This is in direct contrast with CDC, who prohibits you from using their logo without specific prior approval. Okay, now why is that? Well, USAID, they want people to know from the American people, as it says. But CDC, they want their message to be quite unique. So when they speak, they want people to say, hey, CDC is saying something, so we better listen. Okay? That's why during the COVID period, when CDC put in an announcement, generally people would say, well, let's listen to this. Okay, debarment suspension. So here is that first list that I talked about, part 12, is you cannot transact with people who are on this list, which is found at sam.gov. It used to be under EPLS, Excluded Parties List System.gov. Now it's under SAM. So these are the people and organizations that have been debarred or suspended for some reason, some problem with the U.S. government. So how do you find it? And you have to do this for all partners, everyone, and employees. Okay, so you go to exclusions, you click on that at sam.gov, and then up pops this sort of search ability, and you search. So here we show you the result of searching for us, Sustainability Solutions. And basically, it says we are registered under SAM, but we're not excluded. Okay, so you need to do this search for everyone at least once a year. And when you start a program, you would do it right then to make sure all of your vendors and employees are not on the list. Okay, and then I would say annually, probably before your audit, I would do this just to prove that the guys are not on the bad list. Okay, so this sam.gov shows us this. It doesn't show who's on the put it this way. The list includes people who are excluded. So you would not find Sustainability Solutions on the list. Okay, debarment suspension. What we said here, this is a rule that you must notify the AO of learning. This is sort of like what I call the first fraud requirement. And if an organization, I'm just sorry, just 1 second here, Melissa, is this going along with your slide set? I'm just thinking.
Yes.
Okay, because I didn't see any Q&A in here, so I'm going to stop for Q&A in another 2 slides. Okay, the bottom line here is USAID also wants to know if there's fraud on other projects that you're doing. Okay, so any of the funding that's fraud, bribery, extortion, embezzlement, even if it's the EU project upstairs, the Global Fund, they want to know about it. So it's a different rule. You got to notify the AO, or sub, you notify the prime if on your project any of these things happen, either with U.S. government money or other donors' money. So just be careful there. Again, it's important to know these rules in great detail. Okay, terrorist financing. This is the other list. There's really 2 here. So it's treasury.gov. We're going to see, and it says or, but I went deep into the regs and talked to people. This actually should be an and. It's also the United Nations Security Council list. Okay, this is at the primer sublevel. So OFAC, Office of Foreign Asset Control. This is where you learn that you can't buy from Iran and stuff like that. Okay, but it'll be a search. So you're going to do a search, and we searched here for Sustainability Solutions. And you'll see it says here, we are not excluded. So therefore, you can deal with us. So what I would expect to see, and any auditor will want to see, is we're going to ask you, they're going to go through your procurement files. They're going to say, okay, you bought training from Sustainability Solutions. Okay, show me that they're not on the list. Okay, you better have that in your procurement file, or if you've got a list of approved vendors, then have it on that file as well. And all your employees, okay? You can't deal with any person or organization who are on these lists. Okay, and that's what the United Nations one looks like as well. So most people say, oh, it's just this one. It's not just treasury.gov, it's this and this one. Okay, because the United Nations, remember, the USAID doesn't work with every country, whereas the United Nations generally does. So if they think someone's a terrorist, then the US government says, okay, we too. Okay, construction. So this is one of the ones that was changed in just the immediately previous to this one, but I leave this one in because a lot of people don't understand construction. Okay, so construction, again, what I'm highlighting here, people say, well, no, I'm not doing construction. And I'm saying, wait a minute. Construction means, okay, any refurbishment or change to the existing property. Okay, change for a different purpose. So putting up burglar bars, putting in a security door, anything that's brick and mortar is a change. It is deemed construction. Now, the reason this is important is that cost cannot be approved as construction. It can't be approved unless it's on a construction line item. Okay, and many organizations don't have construction in their award because you didn't say to the AO when you were proposing that we're going to be moving into a place that needs to be refurbished or something. Okay, so just be extremely careful. And it doesn't matter if you didn't put it in the proposal and it's not in your award. But I've talked to some AOs, my favorite AOs about this. I said, isn't this a burden if they want to add a line on it? And he said, no, no, change it. An AO will immediately change your award. Not be, they're not happy to do it, but they will do it because otherwise you can't recover the costs. Okay, whistleblowing. Okay, this is quite important. Let's take a quick break here. Melissa, why don't you take us through the questions that we have right now, please? Okay.
Thanks, Doug. It looks like we have one question here about any of these changes or provisions you're talking about. Are they applicable to both USAID and CDC or just USAID?
Okay, great question. So what we are doing is we are going over the USAID version of the modified uniform guidance, okay, or what I call the light version. Now, almost all of these apply to CDC. They don't have a light version, okay? They have effectively the 2 CFR 200, or for them, as I said, it's the 45 CFR. So, for example, what applies to FHI for USAID effectively applies for CDC, okay? There's no light version. Now, they have some, again, this is not the CDC training, but they have some additional rules. Like they have that you have to make sure that a recipient's website cannot search for porn. You've got, again, some other unique things that you wouldn't know unless you had a CDC award. So same thing with CDC. You get your notice of award and you got to read it. The problem with the CDC notice of award, it has a lot of things by reference. Okay, USA doesn't let you fail. They said, look, guys, what applies to you is your award and the attachment, the provisions. Read it. It's all in there. And of course, the cost principles, which is in the guidance. But cost principles are only about 28 pages, I think, the relevant part. So, you should get familiar with those, as I said, rule number 3. So, yeah, CDC has, I would say 95% of the rules that apply to USAID people apply to CDC as well. Okay, next question.
Those were all the questions we had so far. Again, we have about 10 minutes to the bottom of the hour, which is the scheduled end time, and then we can go up to about 10:45.
Okay, well, these are, again, I mean, I've shortened them and we will get through them, but realize, folks, that you should be reading your award and reading these standard provisions. I'm just bringing you the highlights. Okay, whistleblowing is important. Auditors will look at this because whistleblowing normally helps to find fraud and significant fraud. So you need this program. Just 4 points of whistleblowing. One, you have to notify your employees in their language. If they speak, if they don't speak English, they speak Portuguese or whatever else, Swahili, Arabic, Tagalog, whatever they speak, you have to notify them in their language that they have these protections, okay? That they will not be, that they cannot be. And so what do they have protections on? Okay, that basically they can't be discharged, demoted, or discriminated against for whistleblowing. Okay, so they know they are protected. Okay, that's quite important. Okay, then the next thing is whistleblowing it's defined as having reasonable belief that something has gone wrong. It's not a smoking gun. They don't have to have proof. They have to have credible, reasonable belief that something has gone wrong. But those some things have to be something that's significant. Okay, whistleblowing is not just fraud management. Whistleblowing allows protections for people for blowing the whistle on significant, gross mismanagement of a contract, gross waste of funds, okay? Substantial danger to public health or safety. So what are you doing with the drugs? What are you doing with the leftover needles? What are you doing with the blood? Okay, are you just throwing them into a dump where the kids play with them? Or are you putting them in those expensive yellow boxes? That sort of stuff is whistleblowable. Okay, and then finally, to qualify under this program, you have to notify certain types of people. Okay, some of these just wouldn't logically apply to us, but the IG, Inspector General, makes sense. They're very easy to reach. And then bottom line is a management official, basically your AO, okay, the person who gave you the money or who's ever responsible in your organization for managing the program. So normally that would be either at the C-suite or at the board level. And that's where you'd have your internal audit function who would vet these things and send it to the right place within the organization. Okay, so you have a whistleblowing program. Okay, as I said earlier, I said in 26, that's what happened when you have fraud. So I've already explained this. Fraud at the prime level notifies the IG in Washington, and you also notify your AO at the country level. Okay, subs disclose it to the IG in Washington and to whoever gave them the money, the AO equivalent. Okay, so those are the highlights of the standard provisions. Again, there's many more I didn't have time to cover. Let's talk briefly about the required as applicable. So the first one has to do with advance payments and refunds. And so the thing about required as applicable is some are what we call mutually exclusive, meaning you're not going to have both. Okay, you cannot have all of these required as applicables because some are you have to make a choice. Are we on an advance basis or are we on a reimbursement basis? And most of you are going to be on an advance basis. Okay, you're spending USAID money. Okay, they give you the money, you spend it, and you ask for more. Okay, now a couple points here. USAID funds, for a while, years ago, they used to demand that you keep them in a separate bank account. Okay, the uniform guidance specifically states you don't need to keep funds in a specific account. So USAID had to drop that requirement. However, I strongly recommend you keep your funds in a separate bank account. Your US government funds, I would suggest your individual projects to be in a separate bank account. You're going to say it's a waste of money. Well, no. One, it's recoverable as a direct cost. But secondly, right, because you're going to have to keep track of interest, and because that we auditors are going to be looking for, this next slide here is our requirements as auditors under 591 MAA. It says we auditors are supposed to reconcile your schedule of expenditure balance to a bank balance. Okay, well, if you don't have a separate bank account, it's impossible for us to do this. Okay, now this is a nice to have, but all I'm saying is, the missions and the Inspector General get pretty angry when you said you received $2 million this year. We say we spent 1.9, so there's supposed to be 100,000 left, and I can't tie that to the bank account. Well, it starts to raise eyebrows. Okay, so just trust me. After 42 years, trust me, it's worth your while to keep track of your funds in a separate bank account for each USAID project. Okay. You must maintain advances in an interest-bearing account unless, and this is where I talked earlier, if you receive less than 250, you're too small to have to keep an interest-bearing account. If you're not going to earn more than $500 in interest over a 12-month period, you don't. Well, that is very easy to break the 500 anywhere. If you're getting 1% interest on $1 million, you're going to earn. Generally, you would be earning more than $500. Okay, or if there's specific requirements, minimum balances, limited number of transactions, that kind of stuff. Some savings accounts say no, you can't transact out of this account. Then that wouldn't make sense. Or finally, what we call Islamic banking. Okay, otherwise you're going to keep track of interest. Okay, so as I said, that also enables us. This is not a standard provision. This is out of the ADS 591. That's the audit guidelines that all of you recipients would be given that by your USAID agreement officer or AO. Okay, on this one here, I just want to highlight, I don't have time to go through it, but what I do want to say is whoever is reading your award has to highlight who's going to do all this within your organization. So SF means standard form. You can go to a US government website that says, what are the forms? I've got one here, as a matter of fact. When I'm talking up in Zimbabwe next week, okay, I went and they asked me to explain what is the standard form SF 425. Okay, so great. It's there and it's got the form and it's got the explanation, the instructions on how to do it. So there is no reason for anyone not to understand how to complete a US government form. Okay, and there are some people who are so attention deficit that they'll go create a YouTube video how to do these forms. Okay, so trust me, there's total knowledge out there how to complete your forms. Okay, then all I'm saying here is here's where there's a lot of guidelines on what payments, when you must ask for it, and how often, and everything. So for the finance guys, this is equivalent to what I said earlier about the M&E section and that. This is our version, finance folks, of the stuff that we really have to sink our teeth into. Okay, then there are certain types of things with the limited time we have. I'm just highlighting that in the required as applicable, they have either the NICRA section, which very few of you are going to have. And so that's where we learn about terms like F&A, which means indirect, or facilities and admin, and other types of things. Okay, but you're probably not going to have a NICRA. You are probably going to have, and you're going to have probably 5, which is the de minimis rate. Okay, but the reason I include 4 here is because of what it says. Okay, because people say, oh, do I get the de minimis? You're going to get the de minimis. You're supposed to. Prime, if you're not giving yourself the de minimis or a negotiated rate, you are in default. Okay, and your sub could report that to the OMB saying my prime is not giving me, and then it's going to come down from on high. Okay, so just trust me, and if we can talk offline if you want for any of this stuff. Okay, but the whole point, what it says here, notice this would be giving someone a fixed amount of overhead. Okay, it says this provision is applicable or possible when all of the following are true. The recipient doesn't have a NICRA. Well, you don't. Okay, look at the red here. Has chosen not to use the 10% de minimis. It's a choice. It's an election. Okay, you can't deny it. Okay, and then or where indirect costs are included as ODCs, meaning everything is other direct costing. Okay, so that just defaults us down to the de minimis rate. And again, I think most of you by now have been on either our courses or have been exposed to other courses through ASAP or whoever else on how to calculate a de minimis and any questions. Certainly USAID has people generally in the OFM that could handle this as well. Okay, so I'll answer any questions coming up now. Let me just get through here. Okay, so basically you're going to get 10%, probably now bumped up to 15%, okay, on MTDC. So this is the base upon which you're going to apply the 10%, or now the 15. And MTDC means modified total direct cost. That's the most common basis for indirect costs. Okay, and so notice the definition. MTDC means or includes all direct salaries and wages, the fringe benefits of all the people who are in your direct salaries and wages, materials and supplies for the project, the services that you have to consume or buy, including your auditors or consultants and stuff like that, anything for the program, all travel, then only the first $25,000 of each sub award. This is going to 50. Okay, then it excludes. So it tells us what has to come out of the evasion. So you're not going to get 10% on top of equipment, capital expenditure, patient care, undefined, totally long hour discussion on that. Rental costs, why should you get 10% on your rent? You're not doing anything. Okay, tuition remission, scholarships, and participant support costs. Okay, so again, that's we talked about participant support costs earlier. So those things do not attract the 10%, or now 15 de minimis. Okay, so a couple other things, just be aware that it's quite important that there's transparency websites throughout the U.S. government that want to know who's giving who money. So now primes, anytime, put it this way, anytime USAID is giving money to you, obligating it, they have to include that in these certain websites. That gets into usaspending.gov, foreignassistance.gov, and everyone does this. So a prime who's obligating more than $30,000 to a sub has to put this through this FSRS system, which is reasonably complicated the first time. After that, it's like falling out of bed. But the first one can be tough. Okay, so just be careful. So this allows anyone in the world to know who's getting money from the U.S. government. Okay, and it's got to be fairly timely. Okay. Subawards, this of all the provisions that I've worked with the guys in Washington, I think this unfortunately doesn't enable you to understand what's required of you, primes, and it doesn't have any teeth for the auditors. So what I'm going to say is if you do have a sub-awardee or you are a sub-awardee, want to know your rights and responsibilities, you go to the uniform guidance itself, where I said 2 CFR 200, 332, there's 8 items there, A through H. They're adding one more now at the A level, so there'll be 9 items that you must comply with. Okay, read that, and I can promise you, you will be compliant. Okay, as a matter of fact, for everyone, even though USAID foreign recipients, you got the light version. Why don't you? Someone should read the full version anyways, because although, and here's a perfect example where we talk about sub-awards. I hate to say it, but I don't think they've done an adequate job explaining what has to be done. So I can promise you, and I've just sent you there now. If you read the full version, you will be compliant. Okay, there's no way an auditor can hammer you. Realize, though, recipients, auditors can only hammer you for what's in your award, right? The Bob Strauss rule, the 4 corners. You are held to what's in the 4 corners of your award, and if it's not in the award, we can't hold you to it. Okay. Travel and transportation. Okay, I think we're almost ending up here. Just one more, I think a few more slides, so you can load us up on questions, guys. Yeah, travel transportation is complicated, as I say. I want you to have written policies and procedures. The reason I've highlighted international is because historically, in the old cost principles, you needed prior approval from the AO to travel internationally. Well, that's not true anymore. That fell away. Okay. But that proposes risks because, and again, if your AO and AOR want to still ask you for getting approval or understanding why, the question is, do you put it in their face to say it's not a requirement anymore, or do you give it to them? Okay, and my default would be they're asking for a reason because they want to know where your people are going or what they're doing. So, unless it's going to become incredibly onerous, I would give them what they're asking for. Now, you need written travel policies. As I said, we auditors are going to certainly study these very heavily. Okay, all our per diem and travel policies are at state.gov. Okay, what we can charge for travel and per diem and meals and incidental expenses. So that's where it is. But remember, if you have personal policies for your organization that are less than state.gov, you must use your own policies. It gets complicated because we have the Fly America Act, where conceptually that if you can take a leg on a U.S. carrier flying internationally, you are expected to. Okay. Now, there's also something called, that's why it's complicated, the Open Skies Rule, where U.S. government and the European community in the earlier days opened the skies between them, making it possible for you to take those carriers from those countries, open skies. Now, notice the EU no longer includes the UK, so you wouldn't be able to use British Airways anymore under the Open Skies rule. Okay, but conceptually you can use those. But then again, so you can still use, so you're in Kinshasa, and normally in our training, I would ask you, how do you get from your country to Washington or Atlanta or New York? And you'll tell me, oh, I've got to go through Dubai, or I've got to go through Nairobi or Addis or whatever else, or South Africa, because we have direct flights. Okay, so just be careful, or many of you fly up to Paris or Amsterdam or London and then across. Well, most of those carriers have code share, it's called, with a U.S. flag carrier. And that's why it gets complicated, because who's ever buying your air tickets has to know these rules. Okay, they have to know that United has code share, Delta has code share with Air France and KLM. Okay, and United may have code share with whatever, British Airways or someone. Okay, so just be careful. Travel is complicated, and you need a person, as I said earlier, procurement, travel, timekeeping, fixed asset management. You need a guy for that. Okay, the cost principle is actually Act 2 CFR 200-474. So USAID thought it was important enough to put this into both the standard provisions, and they direct you to follow the same rules in the cost principles. Okay, cost share. I don't know. Do me a favor. Put your hand up if you have cost share. I'd just like to see how many of our participants have cost share. Put your hand up. Attendees, cost share. Who's got it? Okay. Okay, a couple of you do. So we'll cover this. So cost share is effectively where USAID sort of says, look, in our example here, we're giving you $10 million, yet we want you to start contributing during the course of this project. So you would have to come up with something. Now, that something historically used to be allowed as a percentage, and the most common percentage was 10%. It's no longer allowed to be a percentage, it's got to be defined an amount, but normally that amount is still generally around 10%. The bottom line is, so in our example here, a $10 million project over 5 years, they're going to say, okay, organization, you need to come up with $1 million of cost share. Okay. Now, what is cost share? It's effectively OPM, other people's money, or time, or assets, or whatever else. So the bottom line is many, many things can be used to contribute to the success of our project here. So the upstairs, the Global Fund guys are doing certain things. Well, that's helping to support our project as well. They may have, or in South Africa here, the South African government provides the antiretrovirals. Okay, so that boom, the U.S. government project doesn't need to pay for it. So that's a huge cost share element. Or they can provide a hospital or a clinic or doctors and nurses and vehicles and whatever else. Okay, so all of those type things. Or if you're an agricultural project, the government provides the land or the tractors or the fertilizer or the seed. Okay, economic development, whatever else, depending on your program, they could provide stuff. Okay, so it's just important to be able to document this for your auditor. Now, cost share is not audited. It's a review, which is less than an audit. But the bottom line is you need to be able to show your auditor, proof that there was contributions to your project from some other source. And IPs, that could also be your staff volunteering on the weekends, your auditors providing other services to you that they're not charging you for. Okay, all that stuff could be deemed cost share. So I believe it is not too difficult to cover cost share. Okay, under PEPFAR, of course, now we're getting to the 90s or 95s. We are starting to realize that we're scraping the bottom of the barrel to find people to assist. So that's our most at-risk populations, which would be frequently sex workers, prisoners, soldiers, things, people who don't want to be found out, gay, lesbian people, and so forth. So this one here is about making sure that you are aware that even though many programs work with sex workers or help them, okay, it doesn't mean you are supporting the act of prostitution, and therefore also you're not supporting the legalization of sex worker prostitution. Okay, and this is very important at the prime or the sub level. So again, someone's got to read these because some of these get very, very contentious when it gets in front of Congress, the guys who are fighting for providing funding overseas. And again, if Trump gets in, then certainly I think you're going to see that one about not supporting family planning kicked right back in. Okay, limitations on subawards to non-local entities. So how USAID defines local is 50%. And there's a lot of money now for localization going to local organizations. So congratulations to you, but there's a definition. 50% of the work of a project has to be done by local organizations, not the prime necessarily. You could have 3 or 4 local, you could have the prime and 3 or 4 locals. That makes up 51%. That's enough. FHI can do the 49%, right? But the majority has to be done by locals. Okay, 2, what is a local organization? It's organized under the laws of your country. They principally operate from there, and they're owned. We say owned, but NGOs aren't owned. But the directors and board basically are either primary recipients or permanent residents, or citizens of that country. Okay, so 51% of the board effectively in the management has to be local. Okay, this is the one that I said, protecting life and global health. When Trump got in 2017, he put it into place that basically said, we can't do family planning and all that. And then when when Biden came in, they reversed it. Okay, I think you can certainly assume that when and if Trump gets back in, this one will probably come back into play again. Okay, which is more. Remember, the Republican. It's not the president; it's the party. Okay, I can't say when Trump. I mean, if Nikki Haley got in, this would probably have to happen again as well, because it's the parties that supports either pro-life or pro-choice. Okay, Republicans are more pro-life, meaning against abortions. Democrats are more pro-choice, which is family planning and so forth. Okay, so whichever, it started with Reagan, so this is not a person-specific thing; it's a party-specific. Okay, and a lot of times, USAID asked me to put this in, that they said, basically, let's make sure we understand the difference between 2 CFR 200, which we've been talking about, and expenditure reporting under PEPFAR, okay? So there's a lot of expenditure reporting, but that really is more about the results of what you're doing, tracking the spending for activities, right? When we auditors don't look at program spending. We don't audit your program. We audit the money, okay? Okay, so hopefully that would complete your picture, at least for USAID, the standard provisions. As we said, if you've got questions or whatever, or want to be aware of our training that's coming up, that again, it's all allowable costs. There's my email address. And certainly one more time, we'll ask any final questions. And I'll turn it over to Melissa. Thank you, Melissa. First of all, thank you all for participating. And thanks for your questions. And again, we're having another one coming up. Just follow the ASAP program, and there'll be one coming up, as we talked about, on procurement and asset management. Great. Final questions.
Yeah, we have one question here and a little bit of time left. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask them now. This participant is wondering about NDAs, Doug. When would you use an NDA in relation to this topic, and when can it be applied or used? When might it be helpful to use an NDA?
Okay, so a non-disclosure agreement would possibly be useful when you are doing your proposals. And a lot of times the subrecipient may have proprietary information, and you're not sure necessarily when the prime and sub are on what we call speed dating, or we are trying to figure out if it's going to be a good fit. And so we want to know about your policies, procedures, or maybe your salary scales or your bands or stuff like that. And that's your special stuff. That's what makes you unique. Maybe that you have a NICRA and how you calculate it and stuff like that. So a non-disclosure agreement normally would say, great, I'm gonna expose what we do or our policies, procedures, but it's only for your use in this specific example. So NDAs happen all the time. I mean, when we get hired to do fraud reviews, right? That's very sensitive stuff. People's salaries and what happened and how their systems work. We sign NDAs all the time, right? When the project finishes, you trash the records, if you don't have to keep them for the U.S. government, and you keep it secret normally for 5 years. So NDAs are very common, and I recommend them. Okay, if you're not sure, especially between a prime and a sub, you want to say, look, I want to be comfortable that you guys are right for us, but I want to give you comfort that we're not going to basically abuse your information. A very good question. Okay, so if that's all the questions we have, I'm just going to the last couple of minutes again, thanking USAID, thanking the ASAP team, thanking Melissa specifically for helping us out there. Again, there's our email address if we can help you. The other thing is that, remember, rule number 2, read your agreement. Okay, and this is very clearly a requirement for these standard provisions. Okay, the auditors are going to read your agreement, and then they're going to audit what they read there. So you want to be, 10 steps ahead of them by being compliant with all these things. Okay, hopefully that is the picture for USAID. Okay, Melissa, with that, yeah, I appreciate it. So read the ASAP schedule. As I said, this will be put up on this webinar. If your associates didn't get a chance to attend, share it with them and put it up. Well, I'll leave it to ASAP to put it on their website. Any other questions? That's it, Melissa.
That's it. Thank you so much, Doug. And again, as Doug just mentioned, this recording of today's webinar, as well as the presentation slides, as well as any other resources you'd like me to post, Doug, please send them my way and I'll post them there as well. Are available at the ASAP website, which is intrahealth.org/ASAP resources. I've sent it in the chat several times. And thank you so much for everyone attending. Thank you, Doug, for presenting. And again, thanks to USAID for continuing to fund these webinars. And we have several webinars upcoming, so please feel free to register for any and all that you are interested in attending. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.